Welcome to Biztech's Startup Show. Today's show is part of our partnership with Medical Fair Asia, Southeast Asia's leading trade exhibition for the medical and healthcare industry. Now, our guest today is Sean Rossiter, CEO and founder of AiHealth.SG. AiHealth.SG is an AI-driven digital health company that is passionate about helping people live healthier and longer lives by raising awareness of their risk of developing non-communicable disease-related illnesses. Now, to tell us more about this, welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you, Brian. Good to be here, and appreciate the plug for Medical Fair Asia, and that's where you can see us live 31st to 2nd of September. So thanks for that.
Now, Sean, for a start, give us an overview of AiHealth.SG and your journey so far.
Sure. So we're a Singapore-based entity with Asia-Pacific aspirations, and really our aspiration is to help people determine their risk of the NCDs, hypertension, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, and then take action with that risk and then help them to manage that over time. And we want them to be able to do that, not in a clinic, not in a hospital, but in the comfort of their own home, and then get treated as needed and be able to be scalable to at a very low cost to basically everybody within a population.
And Sean, this is a big issue, isn't it? Non-communicable diseases, because many of these diseases are really lifestyle related and preventable.
Absolutely preventable, and I don't want to take a negative downturn, but the reality is that 85% of all deaths will be NCD related by 2030, and it is absolutely preventable or prolonged in terms of us being able to assess or make changes that are very simple changes, as long as we're aware of what that risk is and then manage that over time. And it's quite an absolute issue in terms of not just health, but also the cost to your productivity, to governments and to people at large.
Besides Singapore, which markets do you have a footprint now, and which markets are you potentially expanding to?
I'll say we have aspirations to work with people such as Ministry of Health in Malaysia, because they have a very acute sense of the size of the problem, and they're taking initiatives to tackle it. Singapore, of course, very much the same. Other countries in the region, we would like to get into Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, and that's kind of the order of merit for which we're approaching it.
Okay, it's interesting that, Sean, that you targeted the Ministry of Health in Malaysia, because Malaysia in ASEAN has been ranked as the most unhealthy population in the region. Part of the problem is, and it's all around non-communicable diseases, part of the reason for that is lifestyle. It's about population, eating choices, lifestyle choices, and so forth. Tell us a little bit more around the challenges and across the region around non-communicable diseases.
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that the health and fitness apps that are currently out there, the steps trackers, etc., have effectively failed to move what we call the sedentary 80%. Most of the population aren't going to go out and suddenly start running 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. They're not going to change their eating habits, to any great degree. So hoping that an Apple Watch or some other device is going to move the population off their couch, so to speak, I think is only for a very small segment of the population. What we need to do is to determine those who are at risk, at high risk, and treat them accordingly, and basically allow that downward curve of cost and morbidity to decrease by having a more scalable, low-cost solution, as I mentioned before.
Tell us about how you solve this problem.
Okay, so there's two ways of doing it. It depends on which way the patient or the person wants to get access to healthcare. If they go into a GP or a clinic, they can use AI to look at their blood pressure. From a selfie, for example, we'll take their height, weight, and waist circumference and enter that into an NCD machine learning risk model. Then they'll turn the phone over, and that's the only device we ever use, and that's the only device we will ever need is the phone. From that phone, from the back of the phone and the camera, we can actually take your blood pressure. And we actually meet the AAMI standards for blood pressure taking, and we can also take your heart rate. The next evolution will allow us to take blood oxygenation, and we believe we'll be able to look at blood cholesterol levels without the need to draw bloods from a person over time. This is where AI is taking us. So our platform is very much deployed in one market, going through over 10,000 data sets or clinical data sets. And we've shown it to be very, very effective in determining those who are at risk coming through the doors. The next phase is going to be in the general population, upwards of 20 to 30,000 people. No one has ever done an AI trial of this size in NCDs anywhere in the world. So it's very much a learning curve for us. And as I mentioned to you before, it's been a bit of a walk in a park, Jurassic Park. Everything's coming at us from, every particular angle, but, we've moved through that growing stage and very comfortable in terms of the user acceptance of what this is for. Because most health and fitness apps, the users, it's a 93% drop off after 30 days, but we've seen a much longer retention in terms of being able to manage and monitor your health, which is really what people are most concerned about.
So what's the difference? What's the difference? You said 93%. If I have an Apple Watch or something, the drop-off rate is 93% after 30 days. What are you doing different that's motivating individuals to change their lifestyle and behavior?
I wouldn't go so far as to say to change their lifestyle and behavior. It's more of an incremental change, because they know that the risk that they're in, that if they don't take steps such as take medication, monitor their blood pressure, look at their overall eating habit, if they don't take fundamental or incremental changes, then they know that the risk they're in. And so most of these other apps just say you've completed 10,000 steps today. Great. It actually doesn't give you an assessment of where you are in that risk awareness. And so that's one of the things that's made a difference to patients, has been able to see where they are and then take steps to incrementally improve that overall risk assessment.
And tell us what technologies you utilize. You said it's the phone is the only thing that you would ever need, which for me is quite amazing. But tell us what technologies you use and where do you get these data sets from that the AI is learning?
Great question. Thanks, Brian. So we have developed AI BMI, AI blood pressure, AI heart rate, all runs, actually for the first time, it runs on the mobile phone. And in one of the countries where we're doing this trial, we can never be sure of things like internet connectivity. So there's no back end required to run the assessment. We do it in a disconnected state on very old phones or low resource phones going back to 2016 Androids, because we're trying to make this very much an Asia Pacific aspect. And not everyone has access to high-end mobile phones. Not everyone has access to high-end connectivity. So that took us a number of years to be able to develop that, compress it down to a point where it was very much a small footprint on the phone, run low resources, and then put it into a usable state where they can actually get that very accurate assessment of their NCD risk. And so I would say that's very unique to us. The other aspect that's unique to us is, as I said, the thousands of data sets that we're now currently training against. Nothing of this scale has been done before.
Now, Sean, then we've been talking about the impact on an individual level. But what we've not talked about is really the impact on a business level and on governments and countries in terms of non-communicable diseases. Could you give us a sense of some of the numbers in terms of impact in places like Singapore and Malaysia?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a kind of assessment of the verticals, if you like. So in public health, in Singapore, that lost productivity, as I said, is 3 billion a year. In Malaysia, it's 9 billion ringgit. They actually go a step further and say, we believe in terms of overall NCD cost to the GDP is more like 100 billion ringgit a year. So that's the public health. So we aim to take cost out of public health by pushing the capabilities to the edge at a more wider audience, if you like. So bring in those who are most at risk earlier, rather than a late stage treatment, which is much, much more costly. When you think about the private health groups, what we are to them is a revenue generation tool, because they have hundreds, if not thousands of existing patients who have no idea what their NCD risk is. But if they go out and can touch those existing customers out there, determine what their risk level is, and bring those who are most at risk back into the private hospital group, that's revenue generation for them at a later stage. Telemedicine is another great example. Telemedicine, you're waiting for symptomatic patients to come to you. But actually, there's 30–40% of the population out there who are at risk of hypertension, very high risk, and are walking around undiagnosed. What if you could diagnose that those patients were at risk, bring them back into the telemedicine ecosystem, and have them seen to at a much lower cost to serve than what is currently available? Insurance, real-time data, and so on. And Big Pharma, obviously, as they move beyond the pill, closer digital touch to their customers, we will be absolutely relevant to all of those groups.
Now, Sean, then what is your revenue model for AiHealth.SG?
Another good question. So our revenue model is really twofold. One is microservice enablement, which means that if there's an existing app out there, such as MOH has an existing app, they want to plug in some AI capability. Our services are all microservice based, so we can literally drag and drop into the existing environments. Or if they have a different need and want to white label end-to-end what we have, we do that as well. So it's really a case of trying to be flexible, understanding there are some existing capabilities out there, partnering or leveraging and realizing the asset that value that they have by then adding value from our microservices.
Now, looking ahead now, what are some key healthcare trends that you're seeing moving into 2022, 2023?
Good question. It's really a case of, when we look back into the COVID era, we look back at what actually caused most of the deaths or the complications was very much with underlying conditions. I think the health trend has got to be to understand what is the population risk for some of those underlying causes, and start to address that in a much more dynamic fashion. Because the numbers I've quoted you, 40% of Singaporeans, 37% of Malaysians or Malays are walking around undiagnosed with just hypertension. That's a massive number of your population that could be served better by having the tools in their hand to help them understand what that risk is. So I see the trend as being very much being able to put tools in the hands of the population to better assess themselves and move it out of the costly infrastructure that they would otherwise have to go to hospitals and so on.
And again, Sean, it's really around a paradigm shift, isn't it? It's about thinking of wellness first instead of illness.
Very much so. And AI is going to lead, that change, because if it makes it easier for the user to utilize, if it's much more accurate or as accurate as any device out there, then you can see that this trend is inevitable in terms of getting into the market. If not us, then someone else, but it is inevitable in terms of this is the trend.
Sean, I want to zoom in on you. You've got a very interesting background. So you've worked at multiple startups in the US, that were looking to enter the APAC market. And obviously you understand the nuances of APAC businesses very well. Share with us some of your key experiences and how does this help you with your own startup?
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, I have been bringing in US-based startups and building from zero footprints and then growing their teams in the region. And I have to say each country is very different in terms of their approach. Some very pragmatic, some very political. But when it comes to healthcare, I think there's a genuine, need and desire within certain segments of the population to improve what's available, to the population as a whole. And myself personally, nothing says, I have a desire to make this happen. As I said earlier before the show, that when I had a collapsed carotid artery on the right side, and you're sitting there contemplating your own mortality, thinking, if I can get one person over this hump as well before I go, wouldn't that be something? So it's very much a passion in terms of, driving this business forward. But absolutely, there is a need in the market, and there is a need at every particular level, government down, to make this happen.
Now, what advice would you give startup founders in terms of lessons that you've learned, given the fact that you've already had a lot of experience, but then within AiHealth.SG, you've had some unique experiences?
Very much so. I'd say the first thing is, and it's an obvious one, which is be very sure of your market, do your research and talk to your customers before you head down that path. But then I would say, just as much, don't try to boil the ocean. If you're trying to do too many things at the start, you're going to dilute your focus, and you're going to fall in the deep end and be weighed down by your own expectations. So my advice would be, have a good team around you. You cannot do it all. And so with the team that I have, they're probably the best of the best in terms of what they do in data and AI. And that really makes a massive difference in terms of your ability to deliver into the market. Having your best friend who may or may not have had some experience in this particular, it's not going to work. You must employ or team up with the best people you can possibly find, who very much share the same passion, and then you can start thinking about success.
Sean, it's been a fascinating conversation. Any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I would say that, given that we are fairly much a bootstrap startup, that if there is somebody out there in the government position or private sector that wants to, be a part of this journey, then reach out and contact us, Sean at AiHealth.SG or Medical Fair Asia. Love to hear from you, hear your thoughts, and look forward to a chat at some point.
Now, Sean, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Brian, thank you so much for your time as well.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Sean Rossiter, the CEO and founder of AiHealth.SG on Biztech's Startup Show. This show is part of our partnership with the Medical Fair Asia. Check out their website at www.medicalfair-asia.com for more details of their upcoming trade show. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and third-party websites. Thanks again for tuning in.